August 1st, 2017, several members of the MS-13 street gang in Kensington, Maryland, who trafficked and pimped underage girls, met up with a 15-year-old victim and took turns beating her with a baseball bat. The men swung on her a total of 28 times. The girl survived the attack but sustained several serious injuries. May 30th, 2019, a member of the Black Pea Stone Nation from North Chicago, Illinois, was convicted of sex trafficking a 15-year-old girl from Indiana to Illinois and Wisconsin. The gang member physically and emotionally abused the girl for more than a year and pocketed all the money she earned through forced prostitution. January 23, 2020, 13 members of the Sevens gang in Reading, Pennsylvania were charged with sex trafficking women and minors from 2017 to 2019. The indictment stated that there were at least 43 overt acts of violence that took place in that time period, including victims being shot, hit with a baton and hammer, locked naked in a dog kennel, and forcing a minor to have sex while holding a gun to her head. Why are all of these gangs involved in sex trafficking, and why are they so violent towards the girls who are making them money as victims of forced prostitution? To get the answer, we have to look at the progression of gangs in society. Gangs have been a part of American culture during every era of the country's existence. They have managed to have a presence in urban, suburban, and lately even in rural areas. In the 1970s, the FBI boldly claimed that gangs could be kept under control and would not be a significant threat moving forward. In the 1980s, drug sales became a substantial source of illegal profit for many street gangs. Recognizing that gangs were in fact a problem that was not going away, the war on drugs ramped up, and this led to increased contact between the police and street gangs. Consequently, gang members increasingly were incarcerated for drug offenses. To deter gangs from selling drugs, the length of incarceration was steadily increased. As the war on drugs and constant police pressure mixed with the increased time in prison, the gangs adapted. The modern street gangs we know today were not involved in sex trafficking to a significant degree until shortly after the 2000s. This was a result of the gangs looking to avoid significant incarceration for drug offenses and finding reusable commodities that could be manipulated and controlled. These commodities are teenage girls. In the 21st century, gangs control a significant proportion of the domestic minor sex trafficking market in the U.S., according to the International Organization for Children. And the problem is only getting worse. As the National Gang Center found, gang involvement with human trafficking continues to increase. The 2011 National Gang Threat Assessment, prepared by the FBI's National Gang Intelligence Center, states, over the past year, federal, state, and local law enforcement officials in at least 35 states and U.S. territories have reported that gangs in their jurisdiction are involved in alien smuggling, human trafficking, or prostitution. In August 2013, Portland State University released a study on the scope of child sex trafficking in Portland, Oregon, that revealed 49.1% of youth in the study had been exploited by gang members, are affiliated with gang members, or indicated that gang influence plays a large part in their lives. Most shocking of all discoveries is on January 8, 2014, 24 alleged North Park gang members and associates were charged with cross-country sex trafficking of underage girls and women, which occurred in 46 cities across 23 states. The BMS, or Barrio Mojado gang, was formed as a result of cooperation between multiple gangs, and the members took on different responsibilities within the BMS. Some managed the girls and transported them all over the country. Others would forcefully coerce the victims into prostitution and maintain their obedience through acts of violence. Some members handled the money, and some placed advertisements to generate business or booked motel rooms where the girls were victimized. The thing that is so startling about this is the level of cooperation between what would have otherwise been competing gangs. They fought over drugs and money, and somehow the thing that brought them together was victimizing underage girls for profit. With more than 30,000 gangs across the country being represented by more than 800,000 members, this increasing cooperation between gangs is beyond concerning. The increasing gang activity continues despite the fact that there have been examples of members being caught, prosecuted, and given long sentences in prison. For example, on January 6, 2020, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Middle District of Pennsylvania sentenced a Black Pea Stone Street gang member to 20 years in prison for forcing women to engage in prostitution. In Norfolk, Virginia, on December 15, 2016, a Bloods gang member was sentenced to 188 months in prison, and along with 6 other Bloods members, the total amount of time to be served for their sex trafficking offenses totaled 92 years in prison. There are other examples from across the country as well, but almost half of all cases that involve human trafficking charges will not convict the trafficker on those charges. Traffickers are able to avoid being charged by taking plea bargains for lesser crimes to avoid trial, benefit from prosecutors not being well versed in trafficking law, and when committing these offenses in smaller jurisdictions, benefit from limited resources at the disposal of prosecutors to organize a case against them. This is why the International Organization for Adolescents states that gangs perceive sex trafficking as less risky compared to arms and drug trafficking, and thus view it as a lucrative market. And in some gangs, prostitution is a central revenue source where minors in particular can be vulnerable to gang activity. Until the police and courts can deter or stop the gangs from being involved in sex trafficking, it is imperative that everyone, especially teenage girls, are aware what the gangs are looking for in victims and how they plan to exploit them. The gangs use the same tactics as other traffickers by recruiting, intimidating, and exploiting the girls. Girls can be recruited through the Romeo approach, where a gang member will appear to be a boyfriend, only to coerce the girl into sleeping with other gang members and customers to prove her love for the supposed boyfriend and the gang. Girls can also be recruited at skip parties. Skip parties are parties that are often advertised online. They are usually held during the day where teens skip school and are often promised alcohol or drugs. Upon showing up to the party, youth are shocked to find out that they have been set up to be sexually assaulted as a grooming process for continued sex trafficking through forced prostitution. Additionally, girls can be recruited online as gangs will use Facebook, YouTube, and other social media outlets to make contact with minors. Shared Hope International found that gangs are looking for girls who are runaways or minors with no supervision, who are cutting or have eating disorders, are seeking an identity, and those who have few friends on Facebook. What the gangs are really looking for in all of these examples is a vulnerability, so they can use that against the girls. Through the intimidation process, girls can be trafficked in gang territory where the gang has eyes and ears everywhere. The victim may appear to move freely, when in actuality she is terrified to break any of the rules. The control over the girls is so strong that they may still live at home, go to school, but become more and more isolated over time. They will start to have different friends and dress in different clothes. It will appear that the minor is making poor choices, but in actuality, she is being controlled and victimized repeatedly. In one example, a girl was being picked up after school by friends and was home by 8 to 9 p.m. every night. Parents had no idea she was being gang trafficked, and the friends that picked her up every day was actually the gang. She was no longer allowed to have friends. She could not buy anything without permission. She could not come and go without the gang knowing. Girls will be reminded that they cannot get away and are subjected to being burned, choked, stabbed, having their hair pulled out, shot, and gang raped so they never forget the gang's power. In an extreme effort to demoralize victims, one gang showed a video of a previous victim ratting out the gang to law enforcement and then showed the victim's decapitated body in a drainage ditch months after she disappeared. Making parents and girls aware of the signs is one line of defense against gang-controlled sex trafficking. Law enforcement in the courts is another line, and they are getting better at identifying and processing these cases, especially since this was not a concern or known about just 20 years ago. Unfortunately, there is still a lot of room for improvement, and the gangs are highly motivated by profit from the reusable commodities that are children. We will have to see if law enforcement can get the upper hand and stop this horrible crime from getting any worse. That's all for this week's episode. If you are not yet, make sure to follow us on Facebook and subscribe on YouTube at Human Trafficking Hater. Thanks for watching.